it is officially time to start talking about the 2025 college football season with looking at the rosters that are in place. Now, of course, the spring portal is not entirely over, but it is for the most part over, especially for key players. And we know what these teams are going to look like in the fall. And now it's going to be time to start projecting it. Now, of course, things could obviously change until we start the season through these teams. Different things like injuries could definitely pop up, or different factors like progression that you hear about in fall camp. And I always have my finger on that. And though the schedule predictions are going to be set in stone, and I'm going to predict everybody evenly, when it comes to the playoff prediction that I'm going to do in August, that is going to be factored in a little bit more heavily, obviously, than now when that stuff hasn't happened. But if you guys want good information about college football, make sure you like the video and subscribe, as more people will find the video if you do like and comment down below. Certainly, you can subscribe if you want to come around for a little bit more, because we're going to be talking about every single Power 4 team is going to be the goal here. We have plenty of days to try to hammer through all of these, and we're going to try to do it as best as we can. If that means I got to put in overtime on weekends, that's what it means. So we're going to start with the Pittsburgh Panthers. And at the end of the video, by the way, I'm going to tell you about the pennant situation, what that's going to look like throughout the season. It will just be a small little thing that I just want to start off this prediction season talking about. So the 2024 Pittsburgh Panthers were an interesting team, to say the least. A team that started off really hot, got some quality wins, got a huge win against West Virginia in the backyard brawl to start off 3-0, and then that continued as they beat a couple of teams that were pretty solid, like California, for example, had a good season last year, took Miami, for example, down to the wire, and they were able to get out a win there at home, 17-15 in that ball game. And we all remember the 3 pick sixes in the first half that Pittsburgh caused on Kyle McCord against Syracuse. And that was one that the Orange really suffered to the Pitt Panthers, who were playing their best football at that time. Then the season kind of smacked Pitt, and it really went down with the injury to Eli Holstein. And it wasn't without being competitive in these losses, too. I mean, you got to talk about a couple of quality opponents, such as SMU and Clemson, in which they played Clemson to 4 points, the eventual champion of the ACC, who held their own in the college football playoff. But they did also lose a game against Virginia that a lot of Pitt fans would want back, and you had Nate Yarnell starting there for Eli Holstein, and they end up losing in 6 overtime, and which, by the way, go back and watch the highlights and the fun of that, or if you got time, the full game from the Toledo Pitt game. It was incredible to watch, and losing that in heartbreaking fashion in 6 overtimes is just kind of like how that second half of the season went. But we don't predict injury over here, and we're going to take the assumption that Eli Holstein is healthy. So when we're looking at the Pittsburgh roster from last year turning over to this year, you have a lot of optimism around some of these guys. Now, you're losing a couple of big-time targets. Gavin Bartholomew comes to mind, a big-time tight end. And then you also lose Mumfield from a year ago, who was a big play target, and they're going to look to replace him. The second guy, when it came to yards per reception last year for the Pitt Panthers, was Sincere Lee. And I'm looking for Sincere Lee to really take a step up for this offense as far as being that, filling that big play void that the Pitt Panthers might be missing with Mumfield moving on. Raphael Williams is also a solid target, and I love Kenny Johnson. I think he's a very solid, pure receiver. And look, I think if you weren't made aware of the Western Carolina transfer Des Reed from a year ago, the one that came over with offensive coordinator Kenny Bell, Des Reed is an absolute stud, and he's a great playmaker, and he's a good pass catcher as well. I do expect him to get drafted in the NFL in the following draft of 2026 at some point, because of his ability to be able to be a versatile back, be used out of the backfield. And that's going to be something that Eli Holstein hangs his hat on. There's also a lot of experience, that Jake Overman, the tight end, has. He's been in the program for a while, or a little while, a couple of years, and he's been in college football for now in his 5th year, I believe. And this kid is a really good player as well. So filling the shoes of Gavin Bartholomew, who, though was a really good player from a production standpoint, might have been a little bit underwhelming based on preseason hype. I think that the Pitt Panthers have themselves a good target to go to. As far as the offensive line goes, some good experience on the right side, patchwork on the left side a little bit, but getting some transfers in. Jeff Percy coming in from Michigan is one that I'm going to be watching for. He didn't really get the chance to be the starter on the left side of the line of scrimmage for Michigan. I think he's ready to come in and be a starter in his last year of college football. On the defensive side of the ball, as they added the transfer from Utah State, Blaine Spires, they're really trying to emphasize the experience that they have. They have a lot of experience on the defensive side, just guys who have been in college football a while, and mainly a lot of guys who have been in the program for 3+ years. I'm looking at a guy like Rasheem Biles, who's going to be more of a outside linebacker, pass rush kind of guy who will be able to blitz, create that type of pressure, and then a secondary with some experience too. Taman Lymam, he's a guy I'm looking to as well in the secondary as a corner, a lockdown corner for them. Lynham is a really good player with a lot of experience, and opposite of him, Rashad Battle, very familiar name for Pitt fans right there. So ultimately, I think that this Pitt roster was just right there a year ago, and the injury to Eli Holstein kind of spiraled things out of control when it was already kind of like, all right, you started out 7-0, we're going to taper off. Well, the dramatic of them tapering off from 7-0 to 7-6 was because of the injury to the quarterback. And if Eli Holstein stays healthy, this Pittsburgh team has a real chance to do something special. I'm really excited to do this preview with the Pitt Panthers. So let's get into the schedule breakdown for Pitt. I'm going to get rid of that logo real quick so that way you guys can see this in full. Now, the schedule that we're going to be looking at for the Pitt Panthers, you're going to be able to see it all. It's all above that little graphic down there. They get a pretty good start before having to go on the road to Morgantown. And the thing about this team is you got a lot of guys who played in that game a year ago, a quarterback who won that game a year ago in a little bit of a shootout. The importance for the backyard brawl is going to be heightened on the side of West Virginia with the return of Rich Rodriguez. And spoiler alert, we're talking about the West Virginia Mountaineers tomorrow, the other side of this backyard brawl. It will also spoil, of course, my prediction for West Virginia in that game. I think starting out with Duquesne, a team that they haven't seen since World War II, by the way, despite being in the same city, and Central Michigan, definitely going to be good to kind of have Eli Holstein shake off any sort of game rust that he might have after falling to injury a year ago. Off the bye, they get 6 conference games off the rip. But if you take a look at these conference games, you could argue the toughest opponent, depending on what Florida State's going to look like this year, could be Louisville in that 6-game stretch. Syracuse has an argument too. But Louisville is that team that is probably the toughest, and yet you get a bye to not only recover from the backyard brawl, win or loss, but you also have the ability to prepare for a Louisville team, do an extra little bit of film study, and I think they're going to be able to recognize a little bit of a matchup there. More on that in a little bit. After the bye, the second bye, I think that that's a 3-game stretch that is absolutely brutal. Notre Dame, I mean, they're returning a lot, and I mean a lot off of a team that just went to the national championship a year ago. Georgia Tech, by the way, is returning a lot, and Haynes King is coming back. I get Eric Singleton not there, but it's still a pretty devastating blow, I would say, for them to pull a road game at Georgia Tech, sandwiched between Notre Dame and Miami back at home, which Miami's going to have a little bit of question marks. They got to improve a lot on defense, and we got to see how Carson Beck's going to be able to gel with some younger receivers. But that 3-game stretch is brutal for Pitt. The rest of the schedule, for the most part, is very manageable for Pitt to be able to have maximum success. But that last 3-game stretch, man, I mean, a lot of people that are going to be making predictions on Pitt are going to say they're going to be lucky to just win one of those 3 games. So with that being said, we're going to get into the schedule predictions here. We're going to start with 2 easy wins, Duquesne and Central Michigan. I'm not super high on Central Michigan this year out of the MAC. I think they're going to be middle of the pack in the MAC. And so not necessarily horrible. They're not going to be at the bottom of the league, I don't believe. But it shouldn't be a problem for a team like Pittsburgh, as Duquesne is certainly not going to be the problem. The backyard brawl, the stage is set. Rich Rod, does he have his system in place? A lot of roster turnover over there at West Virginia, bringing in a lot of new players, both in the winter portal as well as the spring portal. West Virginia is going to have a lot of new, and this is really the first time that those guys can work through their kinks. Now, they have a huge advantage being at home because Morgantown is a very tough place to play, and it's heightened like no other game when Pitt comes into town to play in that backyard brawl. And I'm so glad that the last few years we have had this game. I just think West Virginia, maybe a lot of West Virginia fans might be mad at this. I think it's reasonable to hesitate a little bit on West Virginia. I got Pitt winning this game. I think they're a more certain thing. They have a lot more experience in this game, and Rich Rod's going to build that culture, but that culture is not going to be instant for West Virginia prioritizing this game. Rich Rod's going to have his energy there. This is going to be a heck of a game, probably going to go down to the wire like it did last year with Pitt coming back, storming back to beat West Virginia. But I think that the Pitt Panthers will be able to get it done for back-to-back years as they go into the bye week. And, coming off of that high in the backyard brawl, you don't have that hangover spot because you get a break. And within that break, they're going to be able to realize the weakness that I don't believe Louisville has properly addressed. I like Jeff Brom a lot. I think he tried to address the problem, and maybe the problem is going to be much less of a problem this year than it was last year. But the pass defense against this quarterback and Eli Holstein, a big problem for me. I'm taking Louisville to lose on the road at Pittsburgh, and I also have Pitt beating Boston College. Now, I think Boston College is going to be a really good game. I'm hoping we get to see a matchup between Alabama classmates, between Eli Holstein and Dylan Lonergan. No slight on Grayson James. I've never been super impressed by the kid, and I want to see what kind of talent Dylan Lonergan can put onto the football field. So, yeah, I'm going to be very excited to see that game if Dylan Lonergan is a starter. I think it will be a really good game, but I think the big difference in this game is Pitt's going to have the experience and the continuity together and the home field advantage, which doesn't mean a lot. Well, it can get kind of rowdy in old Heinz Field. I don't even know what they call it anymore, but yeah, it can get a little bit rowdy. But the bottom line is, at the very least, Boston College is going to have a travel spot here. Pitt is going to come into this with a lot of momentum and a lot of familiarity with one another. I like Pitt to win that game, start out 5-0. Now, Florida State is an interesting one. What is Florida State this year compared to where they were last year? Their offense was an absolute disaster. They bring in Gus Malzahn and a quarterback that a lot of people, including myself, thinks can fit in a Gus Malzahn system very, very well, and Thomas Castellanos. They're also going to have a pretty solid defense. That's not lost on me, but I think they lost a lot off of a defense that, even from a 2-10 football team, was still pretty solid. Given the circumstances of being a 2-10 football team with no offense, their offense is going to be improved. Their defense is going to slightly regress, but it's not going to be terrible. Man, Florida State gives me a weird feeling this year. I don't really truly know how to break them down when we get to the Seminoles. And ultimately, I think Pitt they're going to have a huge advantage at the quarterback position. And I think that they're going to be able to lean on that against the Florida State Seminoles and pull off a massive, massive road victory to go 6-0 before going on the road back up north to upstate New York to play Syracuse in the JMA Dome. Now, Syracuse, a lot of things were interesting to me with Syracuse recently. They added Jonte Cook in the portal after they lost Trevor Pena. The upside is definitely there for Jonte Cook. We got to see it come to fruition. But I think something that's kind of getting missed in the public media, and it's probably because Syracuse isn't really covered on a national level. Just a couple of weeks after Fran Brown names Ricky Collins the starter, the transfer from LSU, he brings in Stephen Jelly. Stephen Jelly more so fits the mold of what they had with Kyle McCord. Maybe he's going to take care of the football a little bit better than Kyle McCord did. Either way, that identity and that style of offense, I think, isn't going anywhere with Syracuse. I get it. Aronde Gadsden gone. Trevor Pena gone. But I still think Syracuse is going to be a very, very solid team, improved a little bit on defense as well. I think that this is the first game that the Pitt Panthers do drop. They go on the road, play a very tough offense and a little bit of a shootout. I think that Syracuse gets the better of this Pitt team in that ball game. We move on to NC State, guys. I am not super high on NC State. Now, we have seen teams that have had expectations end up having expectations early in the transfer portal era because of transfers, and then they kind of get away from that transfer portal nucleus like NC State had a year ago, and they end up improving off that. I wouldn't doubt if NC State would look better in November, and this could be the start of it, giving Pitt a really good game. But I just cannot trust that this NC State roster is going to be at a point to where they can beat a team like Pittsburgh, who's going to be a little bit gritty on both sides of the football, have some guys out wide that can beat you, stud running back, a good O-line. I think that that's a win, and with the mess that Stanford is, I just cannot see Stanford really having a successful season. We'll talk about them a little later. I just, with all that Stanford has lost and all of the drama going on around there, I cannot trust the Stanford Cardinal whatsoever. Off of the bye, they host Notre Dame, and this is actually going to be a really big matchup. I expect that if Pitt is sitting here at 8-1, you can count it up. That's 8-1, and I don't think it's that crazy to say that Pitt could be 8-1 going into these final three games, given how the schedule breaks down. Now, they would have to be able to sweep West Virginia, Louisville, Florida State for this to happen, or lose just one of those four games, West Virginia, Louisville, Florida State, and Syracuse. But I think the rest of those games are pretty safe picks for wins for sure. I think that going into this final week, you could get a lot of hype. This is one of those games that you tune into where you're like, maybe Notre Dame could fall. But the answer is Notre Dame is just too good. And then they go on the road to Georgia Tech, right? I am very high on Georgia Tech this year. I get it. They lose a little bit as far as Eric Singleton Jr. goes. But their defense with Tyler Santucci is going to be much better this upcoming year. And with the baller that Haynes King is, the talent that they still have on that offense, Georgia Tech's going to be a really tough out, especially out in Bobby Dodd. I'm taking the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets to win that game. And this is going to come down to the finale. Now, it's going to be very disappointing for Pitt. And the real question is going to be, assuming that Eli Holstein, by the way, stays healthy throughout the season, which is critical, in my opinion. When they play Miami here, they could get up off the mat, play with some pride. You have two ACC losses, so one can assume that could very possibly be out the window. And to be quite honest with you, doing these schedule predictions, I'm trying to let it play out and not script it a certain way. So for all I know, Pittsburgh has a chance or an outside shot. We saw Miami lose this exact game last year, going up to the Northeast, getting beat by a quarterback who likes to throw the ball around the yard. Pitt is going to want to throw the ball around the yard. And I just don't think Miami also has the offensive firepower to really keep up. I think the Pitt Panthers pull off a big upset, and I do think Miami is going to be good again this year. I think Pitt pulls off the big upset at home. They're going to be underdogs, and they're going to beat the Miami Hurricanes, and they're going to finish the season 9-3, which is a very successful season for the Pitt Panthers. I think 8-4 is more of the public expectation through this schedule, where you see them losing to one of those 3 or 4 games that you could talk about that they could possibly lose, that I have marked them as W's, including Miami, by the way. But at the end of the day, I think that this will break Pittsburgh's way more than anything. And I think that this Pitt team is prime for a huge year after a couple years ago being an absolutely disastrous team, 3-9. They got their quarterback, they got their guy, and they're going to have to make the most of it. I think that they make the most of it. Is 10-2 possible? I think it is. It depends on really what Georgia Tech is and how they can close out the season with those big 3 games. If they could go 10-2, I think there's an outside shot of that. I think 9-3 is close to the ceiling. I think 10-2 is probably the ceiling, the best that Pitt can do. And I think probably the floor, just based on that schedule, Louisville could be a tough out going to Morgantown. Floor for me is probably 6-6, but I think they're a safe bowl team. That's where I'm at with the Pitt Panthers. Final thing before we wrap up here, the banners behind me. So if I have the pennant of the team I'm talking about through the preseason, and this is all going to be preseason because we're going to be talking about the 2025 season and what's coming up for us in college football this year. If I have that pennant, it's going right there where the Pitt team is. But in the season, the plan is to put the game of the week right there and the other games right on top. That's going to be the plan. So all of those teams are going to be right next to each other. If you count them up, I got 8 pennants right here. And then I'm going to put 2 right here for the game of the week, clashing against one another. Those 8 up here are just going to be the next 4 games of the week that I would like to just highlight. It could be like a G5 team, a big time matchup there. It could be a big conference. Just whatever I objectively say is the top 5 games. But the game of the week, it's not necessarily a college game day thing. What I think is going to be the best game of the week or the most impactful for the college football playoff, that's going right here in the season. But for now, if I got the pennant, I'm going to be putting it right here. I have a lot of pennants, but not every single one. And we're going to work to continue on that collection. So I hope that's a nice little touch that you guys appreciate. Not that too many of you guys tuned in for that, but thank you guys regardless for tuning in. Tomorrow we're going to talk about the West Virginia Mountaineers. You can comment down below who your team is, and I can put them in the queue for the next team up. We're going in order here. ACC, next day would be Big 12, next would be Big 10, next would be SEC, Notre Dame included with the ACC schools. Thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like the video. I'll see you guys on the next video.